From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 2 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
This is the AT&T Network, a living, breathing intelligence bringing people together to bring new ideas to life.
Look, that's so simple.
In here, the right minds from inside and outside the company come together to work on an idea, adding to it from the road, improving it in the cloud, all in real time.
Good idea.
It's the AT&T Network, providing new ways to work together so business works better.
Are you still sleeping?
I just wanted to check and make sure that we were on schedule.
The first technology of its kind
Mom and Dad, I have great news.
is now providing answers families need. Siemens Answers.
Issue 1, Santorum Sayonara.
We made a decision to get into this race at our kitchen table and against all the odds. And we made a decision over the weekend that while this presidential race for us is over for me, and we will suspend our campaign effective today, we are not done fighting.
Primary rival, former Governor Mitt Romney, responded to the Santorum news.
This has been a good day for me. Senator Santorum has decided not to proceed with his campaign, and I had the chance to speak with him this morning. We exchanged our thoughts about going forward, and we both have a great deal of interest in seeing the country taken on a very different path. He will continue to have a major role in the Republican Party.
Question, why is Santorum exiting the race now instead of slugging it out right in his own home state of Pennsylvania and its primary? Pat Buchanan.
That's exactly the reason, John. Let's assume he won Pennsylvania. It would have no meaning at all since it's his home state. And if he lost Pennsylvania, it would be a humiliation and a defeat, and people would say, that guy can't win his home state, and that would damage him in the future. He emerges from this primary run pretty good, John. I think he's not Mr. Conservative, but he is Mr. Social Conservative, and what he ought to do now, get himself a primetime speech at that convention, do what Governor Romney asks him to do. He's the only one of these 4 folks who has a chance in 2016 if the Republicans lose in 2012. And I think he ought to expand his own sort of personal base, if you will, to set himself up for another run and, frankly, be available for whatever Governor Romney or President Romney asks him to do.
I think the way that Santorum conducted him in this race guarantees he's not going to be on the short list for vice president. He's not going to be in a Romney cabinet. There's a lot of bad blood, I think, on both sides, and I think what Santorum did, he's getting out now because he ran out of money, but what he did was deepen the gender divide that Romney has to try to make up, and he also deepened the split within the Republican Party between the so-called establishment and the pitchfork conservatives who Pat's with. So I don't think he's done his party any favors, and if Romney loses, he'll be the first one to say, I told you so, and he'll be running, but he'll have lots of competition in 2016. I think this is the end of Santorum's presidential ambitions.
Pat, do you want to object to that characterization of you and your tribe?
No, it's
Pitchfork
not.
Conservatives?
Well, they're old now, but they still carry the pitchforks.
That's right.
Jeff, welcome. Do you have thoughts on the Santorum
Yeah,
situation?
2 things. I agree with what Eleanor said, and I think that the Obama campaign is probably upset that he left as well, because they were delighted to see the arguing going on between Santorum with Romney. All of the fireworks between those 2 candidates was very good for Obama. And picking up on what you said, Pat, I think another reason why he left is because he was probably going to lose his home state, and that would have been a real bad thing after he's had some momentum and really established himself in the last few months.
Maude, he who fights and runs away lives to fight another day. Is that what he can take solace in?
Well, that's his only hope at this stage of the game. The real risk, as was just suggested, after all, he lost Pennsylvania when he ran for the Senate for the 3rd time by 18 points. So he had a real problem in Pennsylvania that he could have, it would have been the end of his political career if he'd lost Pennsylvania. So I think he had no chance to get the nomination. So I think he made the right political choice, and as was said, he has also ran out of money.
Will conservatives now flock to Newt Gingrich, Patrick?
No, they won't, but I will say that I think the conservatives are realistic, and as Mort and I were talking earlier, look, they're going to have to realize that either they move behind Mitt Romney and move enthusiastically and en masse behind him, or they're going to wind up with a second term for Barack Obama. But John, this race is a lot closer than a lot of folks are saying.
Okay, the distaff side.
An 18-point margin. That's the lead President Obama enjoys over Governor Romney in swing states with women voters. So says a recent poll. But the poll was taken before a Democratic consultant said this on CNN.
What you have is Mitt Romney running around the country saying, well, you know, my wife tells me that what women really care about are economic issues. And when I listen to my wife, that's what I'm hearing. Guess what? His wife has actually never worked a day in her life. She's never really dealt with the kinds of economic issues that a majority of the women in this country are facing in terms of how do we feed our kids, how do we send them to school, and how do we worry, and why do we worry about their future?
This provoked Ann Romney, the governor's wife, to take to Twitter and tweet, quote, I made a choice to stay at home and raise 5 boys. Believe me, it was hard work, unquote. Rosen then responded, not on CNN, but this tweet, quote, when I said Ann Romney never worked, I meant she never had to care for her kids and earn a paycheck like most American women, unquote. First Lady Michelle Obama also took to Twitter and tweeted, quote, every mother works hard and every woman deserves to be respected, unquote.
Question, was Hillary Rosen's attack on Ann Romney for not working part of the Democratic game plan to make Ann Romney seem out of touch with ordinary voters? Eleanor.
If anything, it was part of the Republican game plan. This Ann Romney is one of the most appealing people in politics today. She is not somebody that Democrats are going to pick on as a target, and I think the president was right when he said spouses ought to be off limits anyway. What Hillary Rosen was saying is she reignited a long simmering debate that's been called the Mommy Wars between stay-at-home moms and women who work, and stay-at-home moms often feel disrespected. The point she was trying to make is that Ann Romney hasn't had a traditional job outside of the home where she's had to juggle work and family, and so can she really relate to the problems of everyday working women in the marketplace today? Those were ill-chosen words, and the Republicans jumped on them with full force, as well they should. But the gender gap is still there, and the gender gap is frankly based on a lot of Republican policies that even Ann Romney can undo.
Jeff, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say the loud noises you heard in the background were alarm bells going off at the Obama campaign and at the White House. I mean, that's just exactly the wrong message that they want to be given, especially at a time when Obama is doing very well with women. He's polling very well. Romney is not polling very well. So the last thing that they want is to have a gift that's handed on a silver platter to the Romney campaign, and that's what this was.
Why did she do it?
Why did she do it? I have a feeling she misspoke. I'm sure she regretted it
she didn't.
the very second she said it.
She left out the key phrase.
You think it was a test?
No, it's not a test.
It was a test. It was a test to see whether they can get away with this kind of criticism through somebody else other than themselves.
She was a horrendous gaffe, but it came out. Hillary Rosen is a militant, I think, feminist. And there's an attitude among feminists that women who stay home and raise kids are not at the same level. Now, let me tell you why it hurts. I was raised, John, by a mom who stayed at home. She raised 9 kids. She runs a chauffeur. She's a laundress. She runs a restaurant for all these kids, does all these things. She's a nurse. And all over America, Democrat as well as Republican women must have said, you know, I'm raising all these kids and I've never worked a day in my life. What are you talking about? This thing was an emotional hit, and President Obama and the Democrats recognized it and moved instantly.
But there is a part of the Democratic campaign that they want to make Romney appear sort of not the ordinary American, not understand the problems of ordinary America. And this is another version of it, okay? And I think she did misspeak, but I think this was a part of an overall attempt to try and make Romney seem isolated. He's too wealthy. He's never blah, blah, blah.
The Democrats want to have hard-hitting attacks, which they can immediately disavow, and the attack nevertheless becomes lasting in people's memory. You follow me? Even though it's been disavowed.
Yeah,
is that what they were testing here with her?
No, I don't.
In other words,
so.
Rosen is too smart to have fallen to that.
And they have lots of other things that they can attack without going against the spouse.
The way to get hard-hitting attacks in there is precisely the way she did it.
No, she got hard-hitting attacks again. It was a real attack against what she said and against the Democrats, because Ann Romney is now going to be a much more sympathetic figure when she goes around and campaigns for Mitt Romney. She is a sympathetic figure, by the way. They have 5 wonderful kids. She raised them, and it is now she's got a platform from which he can speak.
Michelle, well, I must say, Michelle says equivalently denied that distanced themselves from it by what she said. But if you pause Michelle's words, she didn't really succeed in doing that.
No. Look, it's out there. You know, it's nice. This is not going to go away just because.
There's a long-standing tension between women who are at home and women who are in the workplace, and a lot of women in the workplace feel they're disrespected if they have the choice to stay home and don't. So this touched a number of nerves at a different level. But I must say, I haven't heard the phrase militant feminist for quite a long time.
Hillary Rosen is a feminist. This is what she believes.
But
and what you're saying is exactly right.
I suspect Ann Romney
should it be off limits to attack candidates' spouses?
Look,
should it be off limits?
Politically, if you're not idiotic, you don't do something like that.
You remember a president by the name of Jackson?
Yeah.
You remember his
Reverend
wife?
Jesse Jackson?
No, the president. President Jackson.
Oh, listen.
You remember how his wife was attacked?
She died before she got to the White House. She was called a bigamist. Exactly. Right? Rachel was her name. And it was a brutal attack. And I tell you, Andrew Jackson was looking for the people that did it.
It's also, it doesn't make sense because both of these spouses are very popular. There's no reason to use them as a kicking bag or post.
And
because they're both really popular.
This was a verbal gaffe.
How much of a blow is this to Obama and his race for president?
This is a very serious blow to the Democratic Party because it pushes them out, to the feminist left. But I'll tell you this, Mort is right. Ann Romney is an enormous asset to Mitt Romney. She's an even larger one now that they focus on, here's a woman who's had multiple sclerosis, who's had breast cancer, and who's raised these 5 kids, and some left-winger comes out and says she never worked a day in her life.
This was a verbal gaffe. It's not going to close the gender gap. The gender gap is about a lot of policy issues.
I can see it closing from here.
And 100 laws passed by Republican legislatures around the country.
Closing,
women are smart enough. Women are smart enough to understand and see faux outrage.
This is not faux outrage.
This is faux outrage because Hillary Rosen did not mean to insult anybody. She was speaking in shorthand.
Was this blunder a colossal blunder?
This is an 8 or 9 on a level of 10. Yes.
What is it?
Oh, I'd say it's a 4, and it'll be over with in a couple of weeks.
A 4.
5, 6.
5 to 6?
Yep.
Which is it?
6.
6.
7.
I would say it's an 8. Issue 2, Summit Down South.
There are no senior or junior partners in the Americas. We're simply partners.
No rank. That's how President Obama sees the U.S. relationship with the 33 nations of this hemisphere that are convening this weekend at the Summit of the Americas. The president flew to Cartagena, the historic and unforgettable walled city on Colombia's Caribbean coast.
Question, is there a domestic political angle to President Obama's attendance at the Cartagena summit? Will it help him woo Hispanic voters in the United States this fall in the presidential election?
I don't think the summit will. I do think if he took a trip to Mexico, it would help him. But the summit, I think, John, this is just a meeting of a bunch of fellows who sit down there and talk. It's a publicity meeting. There's not much to it. You got 33 people there, and they sit around and discuss. The one issue that's a big problem, though, is the drug issue, which is a real problem for those folks down there.
Well, look at the first stop that Obama made before going to Colombia. It was in Florida. And he told people there, when I'm at this summit, you're the people who I'll be thinking of. That means it's political. That means he wants to reach out to Hispanics. He wants to reach out to Latinos. And he wants them to know, even though I'm spending a couple days outside of the country, you're on my mind.
It's good marketing and it's good politics. And Obama is always looking to up the U.S. export market, and Latin America has actually weathered the global slowdown better than most. They're actually prospering, and the markets over there are very good. And Obama is popular. This is a terrific forum. I don't see any downside.
Cuba was excluded, or excluded itself. In any case, it didn't show, because Obama had said beforehand, as Cuba is there, the United States will not be there. What do you think of that?
Well, you know, this has been a long-standing American policy to try and exclude Castro's Cuba from everything that he possibly can, and by and large...
Was there a domestic angle, namely the very point that he made? He wants Cuban Americans to vote for him in Florida, and therefore he says if Cuba's not there, if Cuba is there, then...
He wouldn't show up.
Right.
Now look, the Cuban American vote is very important in Florida, and it is one of the things that has held back the evolution of the U.S.-Cuban relations. This is something that shouldn't be at this stage.
Okay, the other superpower attending the 33-nation summit is Brazil. The president of Brazil visited at the White House this week.
Que o presidente Obama e o povo americano me dá nessa circunstância.
I would like to thank the President of the United States and also the American people for the very warm, brotherly, and friendly hospitality extended to me during this meeting.
A mim e a minha comitiva.
To me and, of course, to my delegation.
It was Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff's first official visit to the U.S. since assuming the presidency of Brazil 15 months ago. On Monday, she met privately with President Obama for 2 hours to discuss trade and defense. Here's a look at Brazil, a superpower and a colossus. Size 3.3 million square miles, the largest in South America and the third largest in this hemisphere after Canada and the U.S. Borders. Brazil borders all of the South American countries except Chile and Ecuador. Population, 206 million. Economy. Brazil's is the 7th largest of the world's 185 nations. Since 2003, Brazil's macroeconomy has been expanding. And get this, Brazil's biggest trading partner today is China. Oil. Brazil's Atlantic coastline runs 4,600 miles. The red dots on this map depict Brazil's vast oil acreage offshore. Oil is what President Obama wants to buy, as he made clear.
Brazil's been an extraordinary leader in biofuels, and obviously is also becoming a world player when it comes to oil. And the United States is not only a potential large customer to Brazil, but we think that we can cooperate closely on a whole range of energy projects.
By the way, Brazilian President Rousseff has a national approval rating of 77% in Brazil. Question, is Brazil walking a tightrope between its relationship with China and its relationship with the United States, Pat?
They are. That's right, John. The Brazilians are here. One of the reasons is the United States is pouring all this money out, and what's happening is investments coming into Brazil, and their exports are becoming more and more expensive, and their trade balance is bad. They've got their own problems also with the Chinese, who are being pretty tough. But Brazil is not a world superpower, John. It's the greatest power in South America. That's it. Militarily, it's not a great superpower at all.
China is its #1 customer.
China is his #1 trading partner, John, and the Chinese.
Does that concern you?
Well, the Chinese are get all this money from the United States, and they take it and they invest it in buying up all the resources of the world.
Well, to the extent that Brazil ups its oil production, anything that diminishes the Middle East is a good thing. But we can't just funnel oil from Brazil. And I think what they're upset about in Brazil is the tightening down of the sanctions on Iran, because they see that disrupting the oil market. So when these leaders get together, they each come at it from their own perspective, and I think it's a good thing that the president has good relations with this country. It's an emerging power.
I have to say, with all due respect, what's happening with Iran has raised oil prices, which raises the revenues that Brazil gets from selling their oil.
That was one of the issues that she raised.
I'm sure it is. Right, she's hoping that they raise prices even more.
How's Brazil's relationship with Iran?
good.
It's a good relationship. I mean, I don't know that it's a close relationship, but any one of these major oil-producing countries, they all get along pretty well because they all have the same objectives.
Brazil worked with the Turks on a deal to try to get Iran out from under the sanctions about a year and a half or 2 years ago, and Hillary Clinton came down and slapped them both down.
Who are the members of BRIC, B-R-I-C?
Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa is also a
What's
member.
the story on BRIC?
The BRIC are the emerging powers, developing powers, and you're right. Brazil's number 7, China's number 2 in the world now.
Jeff, do you think we've reached a point where we're finally beginning to take this hemisphere? The United States is beginning to take this hemisphere, namely south of the border, seriously.
I think that's certainly a message Obama wants to give at this summit, and I also think that that Brazil in particular would like to have a closer relationship with the United States. One of the interesting backstories about the president's visit this week was that she didn't get a dinner. It wasn't a state visit. She had lunch. And that was something that apparently the Brazilians were a little upset about. They'd like to have an elevated relationship with the United States.
I think they were upset because the Argentinian president visited with what's his name, Hugo, and the Brazilians were pleased about that. But they have not themselves had any contact with Hugo Chavez.
They want a permanent seat on the Security Council also.
He's really ill. Chavez is
really
ill.
They want a permanent seat on the Security Council, but so also does Japan, and so also does India.
And the United States has been lukewarm about offering support for that.
They ought to be.
By the way, the president on his last visit to South America flew over Argentina. The Argentinians, where I was last week, the Argentinians didn't like that at all. Just flying over and not visiting Argentina.
They know how the Midwest feels in off-election years.
Issue 3, North Korea's dud rocket launch. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can. The White House was watching very carefully when that rocket went off last night, and it broke up. And I think the White House was probably pleased about that. Although they did call it a provocative act, they also said on Friday that this means there's not going to be a food aid deal with North Korea, which means we're sort of back to the future in terms of waiting and seeing how this relationship and how these talks continue.
But the humiliation of the North Koreans, John, and the young new president, who's 28 years old, is going to cause, I think, the North Koreans to do something. And they've prepared, it seems, another nuclear test inside a mountain. It would be the third test of their nuclear device, and the fact that they're humiliated and need something to really redeem their prestige, I think means we're going to have a nuclear test.
Well, John, one of the things that's important, this was intended to be an intercontinental rocket. Now, the interesting thing is that North Korea has sold most of the rockets that Iran has that they can use to fire missiles. They're not intercontinental rockets. They're Shahab missiles. They have over 300 of them in Iran, and they bought virtually all of them from North Korea.
And one of the senior administration officials last night said to me, this will probably be, or give some pause to people who are interested in buying military technology, and that's...
I want to back up to President Obama's flying visit to South Korea about 2 weeks ago. Were you there for that?
I was not on that trip, no, but I watched it.
You watched it. What was his point in going to South Korea?
Well, that was a nuclear summit, and that one of the big things that he has proposed or that he has talked about as president. In fact, one of the reasons that he was given the Nobel Peace Prize was his work against nuclear proliferation. So that was a summit. It was a follow-up from a Washington summit a couple years ago, and it took place in
How many nations attended the South Korean summit?
I can't tell you how many nations, but there were a bunch and very big players. And that was basically Obama's chance to say, this is what we've done in the last couple of years. He talked about Russia. He had that very interesting gaffe.
Did he visit with the troops while he was there?
He went up to the
DMZ.
The DMZ.
Yeah. Have you been to the DMZ?
I have not been to the DMZ.
I have been to the house that straddles the DMZ line, so that half of it is in North Korea and the other half is in South Korea.
Every president goes and stares across.
Right.
I've been there with 2 presidents.
Right.
But I think the White House has suspended the food aid, and I think the hope is that the North Koreans are so humiliated that they might be willing to talk. They're probably going to conduct a nuclear test. They have better luck with those than with the missiles. But you don't know how this young leader is going to respond. He's been humiliated. They invited all the international press in, which is the first time they've done that. So everybody was there and saw this thing fall apart.
And as a result, they had to admit that it was a failure.
But they've got to do
almost want to
something.
laugh
What
at first,
is-
but
they've
that
gotta
would be the
do
worst
something.
reaction.
What is the game plan of North Korea?
The game plan of North Korea is to continue basically nuclear blackmailing the rest of the world.
I think it's to
And I
shut
think
down the
they-
United States, John, for everything they can get out of us by threats and the rest of it. But what they do want is the Americans to leave the peninsula, and they want recognition by the United States, and they want to be recognized as an independent power permanently, and they do not want to be united.
want to
It has
be
a
taken-
big boundary
they want to be
with
taken
China.
seriously.
What is the expectation, our expectation of China and China's relationship with North Korea? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, look, China, we are using China, I have to say, to find some way to contain what North Korea does, because China, like us, feels the North Korea's government is pretty much of a wild card. And so that's something they're very, it's hard to believe how totally controlled that family had over
Since you're so
over
knowledgeable about North Korea, how much money are we expending to North Korea to meet their food aid?
This I don't know. I don't know that it's that significant, but it's certainly going to be significant in North Korean terms.
That's what I meant.
It's not breaking the bank at home,
No.
and frankly, the North Koreans are very dependent on it. But the problem is they siphon a lot of that food aid and they feed the troops, and they've got a 1 million-man army.
Well, and
Do you
as a
know
result
anything
of
about
this,
the new, young successor ruler in North Korea?
well, that's the big question. Is a lot of people don't know much about him, and this is an example of how
Was he educated overseas?
I can't tell you that.
No.
Was he educated in
No, he
Switzerland?
wasn't. No, he wasn't. The other son went out.
False prediction, yes or no? Rob Portman will be the running mate, vice presidential, with Mitt Romney in the fall. Yes or no?
No.
Better than even odds.
Yes.
Yes.
The answer is yes. Bye-bye.
This is the AT&T Network, a living, breathing intelligence bringing people together to bring new ideas to life.
Look, it's so simple.
In here, the right minds from inside and outside the company come together to work on an idea, adding to it from the road, improving it in the cloud, all in real time.
Good idea.
It's the AT&T Network, providing new ways to work together so business works better.
Are you still sleeping?
I just wanted to check and make sure that we were on schedule.
The first technology of its kind
Mom and Dad, I have great news.
is now providing answers families need. Siemens. Answers.